Hi, this is Trent Clark, CEO of Leadership, serial entrepreneur, international speaker, three-time coach in Major League Baseball and in the World Series that just wrapped up. I am with one of my favorites, Cathy McKinnon. Cathy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It is Friday. The sun is shining today. It's all good here in Chicago.
Oh, the sun is shining in Chicago. Yeah, I saw snow up north, so I thought like, hey, sun looks good. Cathy, we rolled out Cathy McKinnon show on the Winners Find a Way show this week. You can find her podcast of Woman of Grit, episode 17 on any network channel that you listen to podcasts on, Apple, Spotify, Google, all the casts where you're listening to your best. Cathy delivers great content on transformation, being a transformation coach, what that means, balance for women in leadership, and all the things that are expected of women these days, which is just not easy. And it was just a great episode of talking about that. Today we are on Ask Me Anything. And Cathy, you're joining me for three big questions. So the first one I'm going to tell you is, and I'll let you start, is the first question is, what do you think is the most important part of goal setting for success? And we do a lot of things with goal setting. We talk a lot about SMART goals, setting specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound. A lot of people have heard of SMART before. What do you think is probably the most important things for people to consider when they think about, I want to reach my goal, I'm going to set this thing in motion, and I want to do it right from the beginning?
I think something that is it's a bit controversial, but I also think it's relevant is that we don't hold ourselves to the timeline. And you can say, well, of course we need to hold ourselves to the timeline to deliver, but is it whether or not you achieved the goal or whether or not you achieved it by a particular day? So if I don't achieve it by Friday, I achieve it actually on Monday. Should I beat myself up over that? No, because I still achieved it, right? Yeah. And sometimes we get so caught up in beating ourselves up because, hey, I said it was going to be Friday and I missed Friday and there it's blown and I'm just going to throw in the towel and I'm done now because I didn't hit Friday.
Yeah, I love the quote that there are no unrealistic goals. There are only unrealistic timelines, right? So, and we had this conversation actually this morning with a group who's someone who's going for and says, hey, I want to be a partner in this firm. And that's awesome, right? That's a great goal. Given the position she's in that moment, that is not a 1-year goal. That is probably an 8 to 10-year goal. And it's very realistic under that timeline. Now, not easy, right? It's relatively simple. The roadmap's laid out there, but all those steps are not easy. But it is realistic and attainable. And but if someone said, "Oh, I want to make partner in 2 years. I just joined the firm. Hey, Cathy, don't you love me?" And you're like, yeah, Trent, we think you're pretty good, but I don't think if you're going to make partner in our firm that quickly. So that's a big one. I think the other thing when we look at goals, I always look at the fact of there are significantly two kind of points here where we get here's where we are currently. And this is what we're dreaming about, where we really want to be. And so the current to where we want is reality, to what we want is a new reality. So to me, what I think is probably the most important part of goal setting is being very diligent on this vision work of exactly what you want to create. Because I think a lot of people set really basic goals and then they reach it and they realize oh, I still don't have the money for a new car or a private school or a better neighborhood or, whatever they're going for. They didn't set the right goal because they weren't really clear on what that vision was.
What's the picture?
Yeah. And I think if they get that picture really right, it's easy for people like Cathy and I as coaches to back into that, go, hey, here's the current. And now that we were very clear about where you want to go, let's talk about quarter by quarter by quarter, what's going to take to get you there and set up that timeline. So it's so much more strategic, thoughtful, and pointed to be focused on those items that have to be done if we're very clear about that. And I use the example all the time of a GPS. You and I, we fly into a new town and you and I are going to go do this event and talk in Tampa. Well, we don't know Tampa, but we got to go at this hotel conference center. And we're like, okay, where's that? We plug it in and we know where our end destination is. We build flight itineraries. Ubers, GPSs, all these things around it, and we get there every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But today we don't know how to get there. So, but in a matter of moments, we can plan and execute on how we do that and follow that plan very diligently. And we're used to getting that and achieving that goal, right? Because GPS is it's good, right? It
Good.
it's good. It tells us how to do it. And so I see goals a lot the same. Do you see that the same, or do you see it differently,
I
Cathy?
do, yeah. But a lot of what I work with my clients on and talk and speak about is you have to, like you said, you have to understand the big picture, right? It's
Yeah,
like typically you do not get on a flight without knowing where you're going. You don't
that's
show up
right.
at the airport. I mean, occasionally people do spontaneous things, but you typically don't show up to the airport and go, I want to go somewhere.
Yeah,
Well, okay, where? You can't buy
yeah,
a ticket if you don't know where you're going, right? And
yes.
so you have to understand the big picture, and the big picture changes and evolves. I think people also get stuck there, right? Well, this is what I had visioned and laid out, but it's changed and it's evolved. Well, that's great. It should. It absolutely should. And so you have to be open to, okay, I got to destination A, but now that I got to destination A, I want to go to destination B, C, and D because
Mm.
I figured out that not only did I find it that my pathway to destination A, but this is bigger and better than I thought it could be.
That's good. I know that I run into a lot of folks in the entrepreneurial world who get caught up in ready, fire, aim. And how
Mm.
I would describe that around goal setting is Cathy and I today are both sitting in Chicago by chance, and different parts of Chicago, but we are both in Chicago area. And if we both want to go to Denver, and we were just like, yeah, let's get in the car and go. And I just happened to go like, hey, listen, just a short stop in Virginia is accorded, for me, Cathy, that's fine. And you're like, wait, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like a very efficient route. Like, and I think a lot of people are kind of ready, fire, aim,
Mm.
where we get ready, we want to go do something, and then we don't really have an aim on where that is. And we could eventually get there, but you and I could be in Denver probably by late tonight or tomorrow morning in the car, or we could be there in 4 weeks if we stop through Virginia, Tallahassee, Dallas, Knoxville, Lincoln, Santa Fe, and then try to head up, right? Like this, and
Right.
this may be 3 weeks later. And does that work? And I think there's a lot of that happening.
I mean, could it work? Sure. It
Can work.
could.
Yeah,
There could be some value in the stops, but you
could
have to
be.
understand the value versus the reward.
Yeah. Yeah. And most people cannot afford those inefficiencies, right?
No.
And yet they're all there because we just simply haven't mapped the plan and been very clear on our vision of what we need. When you tell me, hey, listen, we have to get to Denver, we are meeting with someone at noon tomorrow, our vision is very clear at this point. We don't have times to stop, even in Lincoln, which is probably an hour and a half out of the way. We do not have the luxury to do it. And so it shapes our focus, it shapes our attention, it shapes our motivations. And so I think that's pretty important. Okay, let's anything last on goals before I move to the next question?
No, I think again, having them tie into the big picture is so important. And I think having the open mind of not beating ourselves up when we don't achieve it by the exact date possible. It's did you achieve it? People are
Mm.
going to remember whether or not you achieved it, not necessarily the date that you achieved it.
Yeah, I had a good story on that, which I think really hits. I had a young lady who's very interested in becoming, really expanding her business significantly. And
Mm.
we were going through some smart goals, and she set a goal that was nearly 15x her current revenue number. And she'd grown about 20% from the year before, year over year. And now she was 15x. And I thought, wow, is that really realistic? I mean, that seems like extremely aggressive. Is there something I'm missing? And of course, as she explained it to me, she had an investor come in. She had increased capital. She had a model. She had the vision and the dream very clear on where she wanted to go. And this capital was a stepping stone she was using to do it. And she had each quarter, she was on a franchising operation. So she knew how and what she would need to do by each unit in order to expand. And I got to tell you, Cathy, 15x in 12 months is pretty aggressive. And unfortunately, she only hit about 13x in that timeline. Right. So
is that really bad though?
Is that a failure? Right. Like,
I don't really think that's bad.
Yeah. You 13x'd your company, and I'm not sad about it. Right. Like, I mean, it was an absolute grand scale of magnitude of growth in such a short period, and with a very strategic plan that I'm sure any blip on the radar would, certainly, lose that timeline because it's so short. But 13x was doing a lot of things right. And so lots to celebrate there. Even though, like you said, that 15x probably took 14 or 15 months, right? So,
yeah, but again, are we going to beat ourselves over 13?
She was not beating herself up. I think she was enjoying her new Tesla in her new mountain home, right up by the ski resort just outside of Salt Lake. So I think she was fine. I think she was.
She's good. She's good.
Yeah, she was good. She was good. There was no bruises of being beat up at all. So let's talk about this one with the World Series just wrapping up. Obviously, I get some baseball questions, but I think this is one that's good for business and sports and organizations. Why do teams succeed on this big stage through adversity? And I think I'm going to preface this question where I think they meant this, and maybe I'll just put my spin on it. Through the regular season, I think in pro baseball, in the last 10 years, I think one time the best season record actually won the world championship, right? So like 9 times, either the number 2 through number 8 ended up winning the championship when it came down to it in the games that really you needed to succeed and matter. And not that the regular season doesn't matter. You have to get in the playoffs and qualify. Right. But when that big bright light was shining, other teams succeeded and not quote unquote the best one through this last 6 months. So what's your kind of take on that as far as the Atlanta Braves and their championship and any organization that can glean some information off what we've learned from that?
I think, again, it comes down to how you perform in the moment, right? Of course, the pathway matters, right? You have to get into the playoffs. You have to be on the bracket board. I mean, if you're not even in the bracket, you're not going to be in the game.
You're not in the discussion.
Right. But like you say, you could not have the best record all season long, but how you continue to show up, right? You have to continue to show up game after game after game. It's not just, I showed up once, I got in the bracket. No, you have to come with that same level of intensity every single game. And then when you're in that World Series game, everything is on the line. You got to go all in. And I think sometimes either people get burnt out on the runway, right? And they go sprinting out. And then by the time they get to that championship game, they're just like, I've got nothing left. Right.
Do you find that? I know you're a hardline racer, right? You've done some pretty big races. Do you just looking at your hardware there in the background, right? Let's talk about let's talk about some of the really tough mudders and races of the world. Like, can you beat yourself in the first 10 minutes of that race, that when you absolutely need your best, it's not there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the difference between sprinting a 5K and running a marathon. You can't do the same at the same speeds. You really, you won't be able to maintain. Right. And so you have to do a lot of understanding of your own skill sets, understanding of your own motivations. Right. I did not do my Spartan Super in the same speed as I did my Spartan Sprint.
Yeah.
I didn't.
So let's talk about that Spartan Super. I mean, it comes down to the last 500 meters of this race, right? Less than, a little bit over a quarter mile, of course, maybe a mile and a half. So, I mean, what is the difference in a close race that separates that person who comes out on top?
It's what you can pull out in the end, right? You know, like
Yeah.
we joke about like the grit and the resilience, but like, do you have anything left in the gas tank for those last 500 feet yards? Because if you put it all out on the field and you've got nothing left and you can't in your mindset shift to having anything left, because that's what it comes down to at the end of those, right? Like you are physically exhausted. So can you convince your mind with your body and your thoughts to pull out that last bit of energy to go barreling across the finish line?
Mm. Well, and I think and I would say that's awesome, right? And I would also say let's back into that what it takes to
Mm,
have that in the last 500,
yeah.
when you need it,
It's
right?
not
Let's
easy.
talk about the 3 months in advance of that, of the rest I've had, the nutrition I put in my body,
The
the
training.
mental, physical, moral conditioning that it
Hmm.
takes me to be at my peak in that moment, knowing I have what it takes, know I'm prepared for this moment, the health of my
Mm,
training, doing it right, that I'm not running on a sore or torn calf or something in that effect, right? Like
yeah,
that's a big factor for us in baseball.
absolutely.
Like when 3 World Series, and I would look at back at that and think like health was a big part of that. Like if
Of
you
course.
at that level, you don't have a couple of your best players due to health.
Forget
They're
it.
either not in or they're limited because of their health. You become such an average team so fast because they're critical skill
Yeah.
positions. And at 75% in that league, you can't beat everybody. You have to
Mm,
be at 95%, showcasing that talent ability each time. And when that gets knocked down due to whatever factor, whether it's an
yeah.
acute injury, chronic, or lack of preparation, or error in your preparation along the way, any of those factors all of a sudden compile. And so there's a whole when I think about the teams that are really kind of competing at that level, they're built for those moments.
Mm,
They're built with the long game in mind. They will
yeah.
sacrifice some of the regular season schedules with the big game in mind, that when it comes to this time, we're preparing ourselves for the bright lights and the big moment, and having our people in the right positions, in your business, having the right people in the right seats when it really comes down. Because, I think we're going to go through that. I mean, I think through
Oh.
a lot of organizations, it's not so long ago that we remember 2009, of
Mm,
very tough times in organizations where it's like, whoa, cutbacks, and we became very lean, very efficient. And
mhm.
with the current parameters and this really inflationary condition looming, we could very easily go back to a very difficult and challenging time inside any kind of organization. And
Absolutely.
and it could be growth too, like we saw during COVID. Like if you were a cardboard manufacturer, were you positioned to have 1000% growth? I mean, because no one's ready for that, right? And 10x your business. Where do I find 250 more people in my town
Right.
that have any skills, that what I need, and time to train them, facilities to manufacture the equipment? I mean, all these factors, right? So, fortunately, in sports, it's a relatively controlled environment minus the weather. And so you kind of can build around a lot of the expectations, because other than that, the parameters, they've got a range of this. In
Mm.
business, I think sometimes our range is much wider of
Oh,
what's
yeah.
possible that could happen, right? So getting prepared for all and any possible scenario is not probably likely,
No.
but having people of adaptability, I think, are going to be
Mm.
really important in that, to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think adaptability, and then again, like, you talked about the physical training going into, you know, pro baseball. Yeah, physical training is important, right? In any sport, any competition. But just as equally important, but doesn't get as much attention, is the mental training,
No doubt.
right? You get a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I was in the gym. Oh, I ran my miles. Oh, I lifted." Okay, all that is great, but are you also training your mind?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Andy Frizzelli has. He has a 75 hard program.
Mhm.
One of his requirements is the 10 pages of nonfiction reading a day. I mean,
Yes.
it's upskill. upskill your mental, learn biographies of people that did it. I also think about special, really high level grit formula players, right? Like grit formula players like a Jerry Rice. He's a 9 talent,
Mm,
he's a 10 effort, and he's in the 900s all day long, right? 9 times 10, 90, 90 times 10, 900. And one of the things that I think that some of those athletes had special was their ability to push themselves mentally
mm,
in that effort to another level. And that physical effort became part of the mental challenge to say, like, hey, anything else you can throw at me,
yeah.
I'm not worried about because I faced it already mentally. And mentally, I feel so strong to overcome anything that may come or adapt to what I need. Putting themselves in very uncomfortable situations purposely in that training to have
Mm.
to overcome.
Yeah, you have to, right? And I don't know if people just don't focus on it, don't want to focus on it. There's probably several reasons. Um, but once you train your mind, you will realize that you can do much more challenging things physically.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's the story kind of you can't hurt me, right?
Mm,
Goggins is just like the physical thing was just one thing. The mental is where he was really stressing his level and running on broken bones and all these things. Like I don't know if any of it's healthy, right? But Goggins is a freak and just pushing himself to another level of mental capacity.
yeah.
And I like also, man, I'm going to screw this up. The movie about taxing your brain to
Mm,
another level, um, and I can't think of it. It's the guy from Hangover, right? The guy that everybody loves, and yeah, I cannot think of the name of the movie for a second. I'll think of it, but just that ability, like, hey, cognitively, we're only working at maybe 40%. What if we tapped another 40% of our cognitive abilities, awareness, insights of our brains, and it's a fascinating movie to think about what's possible, right? And so in pivot to that, let's talk about the next question, which kind of dovetails off this, which is some people persevere and some don't.
mm,
The resolve, the resiliency that it takes others in facing adversity that are willing to push another step, go one step further, take another stride, and sometimes it's just like that. It's just a matter of, hey, I'm going to put one more foot in front of the other, right, and keep
yeah.
going. I don't know this, but my guess is there's many people who have felt that in the Spartans and in these races where you get to a point
Me?
where you're like, yeah. So why don't you talk to us? Take us through that of those days you feel like I'm not sure I can go any further. What I can do is I can get from here to here, and then I'll worry about the next here there, right?
Yeah, you have to, right? And I always joke. I was not a runner in high school. I was not a runner in college. I hated running. In fact, if you asked me to run, I would say I don't do running. So when I started running, I was always that next landmark. Like if
Yeah.
I made it to that stop sign, okay, and then I got to that stop sign, okay, now I can make it to that tree. And it
Mm.
was literally baby steps. And the folks running with me were like, that's only like 500 feet. I'm like,
Yeah. Right.
yeah, but 500 feet, feels like it's going to kill me because I'm
Yeah.
not a runner, and certainly I was not a distance runner by any means. So I literally had to do that baby step methodology. Okay, I made it to the tree. Now I'm going to make it to the stoplight. Okay, now I'm going to make it. And there are points during Spartan races where I am physically like done, but I baby step it until I can see the finish
Mm.
line, and then I go tap into that last 5% that I've got left. But if you don't do that, it will really tax on your brain, right?
Yeah.
But if you focus on the entire staircase, you're not going to get past step 5.
Yeah. No, and I think it's also individualized, right? Like we have
Mm,
to think. I like the fact that you took that down to what you needed. Where, we walk out of the same front door, and I'm saying to myself, all right, little stretch. I'm thinking 12 mile, and you're like thinking, hey, I'm making it 1 mile, and then I'm going to take it at that time to what's next, right?
Yeah.
Like, let me get there. And I'm not thinking anything beyond that 12 mile. Like, I will stop right at the end of that 12 mile. Like,
Sure.
I know it. Like, that's it, right? And I love, there's a story about one of these, ultra marathoners, big race, like a 3-day race, and everybody gets a kick out of it because this person shows up who's late 50s, early
Mm,
60s. I'm going to paraphrase this because I don't remember it well. I read it about 5 years ago, and he's got like work boots on, and he's a sheep herder. And he's
mm,
like, yeah, I want to get in the race. And they're like, you got all these people, decked out
right.
gear and the water cooler systems. And he's like, okay. And they all, like, okay, you sure? And they're like, yeah. And yeah, I'd like to. And so they do this, and they hit the glass, and everyone takes off. And he's a tall guy, and starts big long strides and starts walking. And they're like, yeah, what's he doing? Like, I don't know. Does he know what he's
But he
doing?
gets
Like,
it.
and so the whole premise of the race is you go out and you run like 60, 70 miles a day over
Mm,
3 days. So the race is like a 250 miler.
yeah.
Well, he doesn't realize that. He's a farmer who runs this thing in Australia with like 10,000 acres that he has to go out for months and herd
Mm,
like animal and sheep and this and that. So he goes out, it's like, hey, I'm just going to walk straight through. I'm not sleeping. And so he wins the race because he goes straight through, right? And everyone else is like, oh, I'm going to go run and then I'm going to sleep for 6, 7 hours. Like, it's like, well, why would you do that? Like, I'm just going, right? And everyone
yeah.
goes, wait, what are you doing? He's like, I didn't know you could stop. So like that different perception of like what the resolve and the resiliency takes, like what I'm used to, what my body can manage, and
Mm,
how I can manage that, I think becomes a really important fair what we prepare ourselves for. But there is a there, and I don't know if I can explain what creates resolve and
mm,
resiliency in people, other than I would say the one constant is a number of setbacks that they've had to overcome,
mm,
because there's been significant hurdles, mountains put in front of them, and said, well, yeah, you can go ahead, but you got to get around this. And they're like, well, that's a pretty big mountain. Like, well, yeah, you can go around it, you can go under it, through it, around it, like take your pick, right?
mhm.
And they're like, wow. And then they did it and realized, hey, I went around the mountain.
Did
I went
that.
around, and I got it done, and I got to my destination, and I reached where I wanted to go. And when people have put roadblocks up or anything else in front of me, I found a way to overcome that. I've done it before, and I can do it again. And they have confidence in that
Yeah.
they have an ability. And I think that's the only thing I could say what people get resolve and resiliency from. I think there is some innate quality, I think, but I don't know that.
No, but you have some innate quality, but you don't always tap into it until you get past that first obstacle.
Yeah.
It's always that first one that really trips people up. But once you get past the first one, you're like, well, if I did that, I can do this. If
Yeah.
I ran one Spartan race, I can run a second Spartan race.
Yeah.
But it's always that first obstacle that seems insurmountable because they've just never done it before, right?
Right.
But once you do it, then the door opens. Then you're like, well, these other things seem simple because I did this big challenging thing.
Yeah.
But the fear kicks in for that first big challenging thing.
Yeah. It's so good because when I think about like people we've had on the Winners Find a Way show who talk about hard things that they've had to overcome or hard things in their life that have been challenging, they look at modern day goals or challenges going, wait a minute, the biggest challenge I have today is I lost my phone. Like one person thinks that as disaster, right? Like that
Right.
is could never be overcome. The other person's like, I'm gonna go to Verizon and get a new one. Like, like
Right.
I can't change it. Like I can resolve this in literally 45 minutes. I can't, stupid for sure, but can't change losing it, like or dropping it in the water or whatever. And they move on very quickly and have a perspective around what is a real challenge and what isn't.
Well, that's what it comes down to, right? Perspective.
Mm, mm. So let's talk about that. So would you say that in order for a person to have resolve and resiliency around hard things, where would their perspective have to
Mm,
be?
mm. I mean, again, right? You can't sweat the small things. If you get so caught up in the small things, you'll never get to the big picture, right?
Hmm.
And so you have to keep going, understanding that the purpose is bigger.
Yeah.
Like, what are you truly trying to achieve? And yes, stuff will happen, life will happen. You'll break the phone, you'll get the crazy phone call, whatever, stuff will happen. But how do you move through that, understanding that the picture is bigger, the purpose is bigger, the impact is bigger, and that's really what you're trying to achieve. A lot of these things along the way are just tests to see if you're ready to take on that next level.
Yeah. Well, and I think we go back historically, right? I think in our country, I would think of like a guy like Thomas Edison, right? Is a guy who just overcame and
Mm.
overcame and like had this mental framework that failure wasn't an option. It just, when you talk about him talking about the light bulb, like, hey, I figured out umpteen thousand ways of how not to do it, right? Like his perspective was very different than this is hard. He didn't know the timeline. He had some ideas of that, but he was relatively okay with whatever that timeline was. He was just
Yeah.
willing to put his head down and continue to find the way to do it, and by eliminating ways you don't do it, he felt like that was every step, right?
Yeah.
um, I think one of the challenges in people that talk about resolve and resiliency is their views.
Mm.
um, the person I would think probably three or four people that I know, and I say, wow, you really test high in resolve or resiliency, and they're like, oh, Hmm.
Do.
Like they don't ever consider it because
Yeah.
that's not their lens. That's
Mm.
not their paradigm. Like this is hard from maybe other people's perspective. I don't know who other people are, right? But they go, "Whoa, that's hard." Like Michael Jordan, you became the best basketball player in the world. That's hard. Like I don't know if he thought that was hard. He was doing what he loved. He enjoyed it. He worked hard at it. And is his perspective, was his goal ever to be the best in the world? I don't know. But at the end of the day, I don't think his lens is, I overcame a bunch of challenges to be the best in the world. He's like, I did what I love to do and became as good at it as I could possibly become at it. Probably more motivated by competition and winning than anything.
Oh, sure. But like you look at it when you're in it, a lot of people don't think that they have the resolve and the resiliency. They just think they're doing what has to be done.
Yes. Yes. And that's why I think people who have quote unquote testing for resolve and resiliency are
Mhm.
surprised by it. They're like, oh, huh, I
Yeah,
didn't
because
know
they don't
that.
they don't think about it from that, again,
That's
that
right.
perspective, right? They just think, I know what I'm after, I know the vision, I know what I want to achieve, and I'm just doing what I need to do to get there.
For sure. All right. Well, listen, I want to be cognizant of everybody's time, your time as well, too, Kathy. Thank you for coming along and joining. Any
Thank
last
you for
words
having me.
on goals, winning organizations under tough conditions, resiliency? Any last
Mhm.
thoughts?
I think, we're wrapping up on the year. Everybody does their year end planning and goals for 2022, but also, think about the big picture. Think about the impact you want to make. Think about the legacy you want to leave, because at the end of the day, people aren't going to remember if you did it by a particular day. They're going to remember what you did and how you behaved and showed up when you did it.
That's good. That's good. For everybody, thank you for joining me on Ask Me Anything. Always good questions from our audience. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming along, and for Cathy McKinnon being my guest today. So lovely, Cathy. Thank you.
Thank you.
She is on our podcast again on Winners Find a Way. You can find it on all the major podcasting networks under the Winners Find a Way logo. She is episode 17, Woman of Grit. And as a Spartan racer with all the hardware back there, she is not afraid to take on some challenge. Probably known a little bit for resolve and resiliency, Cathy McKinnon. So a great topic, a good question line for us this week. And so thankful for everyone who joined us. Everybody have a fabulous weekend.